Hello and welcome to the program. Enjoy. I am Suren. Can you move things with your mind? Here's a question. Once upon a time, this was a very fascinating idea. I remember during the school days, some of my fellow students having discovered that this sort of thing was possible. That they could probably move things with their minds, such as lifting the skirt of their female classmates or even some female teachers. The idea was probably the very fascinating one, but morality was never questioned. We were all very young then. That was a time we children were able to play a game of thoughts. I don't know if you have had that experience yourselves. Anyway, in this game, we were to concentrate on creating clouds in the cloudless sky and bring about rain. Oh, I know what you think of, but yes, we could do it. No matter how small the rain was, what we have done has certainly achieved it. But nobody concentrated on how it was done, how it was at all possible. Yet there were many people who thought that we, the young children, possessed a certain magical power and could manipulate things around us, such as bringing in the rain. Bringing in the rain, let alone creating clouds in the blue skies, was certainly a very interesting feat, let alone a game we children have gladly played. I myself, for one, and my brother, we used to blow into the air, hoping it to be amplified and become a storm to cool the environment. And mind you, it worked. We have then asked each other, how did it happen? All we knew was that it worked. We have asked our parents about this. How was that possible? But their answers were always, keep on dreaming, my love, keep on dreaming. However, we were not dreaming, we were doing it. We did not know, nor at all realize, that there was something called psychokinesis. For a long while, we have never thought about that until we came up with rather interesting literatures all around the libraries. We were extremely excited to discover that it was not only possible, but everybody was capable of doing so. But the question remained. We children were more capable of doing so than the adults who were so practical, so down to earth, supposedly so very logical, and so very well educated. But we knew of these things without realizing that it was not believed in the circles we grew up with as children. Why was that so? Was that because we children were closer to the nature and that the knowledge was inherent in our minds already? Let us examine this aspect of life in alignment with the discoveries of other researchers and people of curiosity. First of all, the human mind always desires and demands to soar above the common routine of the human activity, to obtain fortune, fame, power, friendship, love by controlling the matter around it. And this has led people in various directions, with the desire to become a dream come true trend, and it still continues. For instance, becoming famous, walking on water, or suddenly being transported somewhere else without being aware of it. Becoming a multimillionaire. These are experiences recorded in the pages of the world's history. These incidents are fascinating and are also recognized by prominent historians. There are also feats of levitation, teleportation, psychokinesis, miracles, or being lifted by spirits, all representing a very unusual phenomenon which is not fully understood by the sciences of our times. Only a very few people have experienced such strange occurrences. Well, at least consciously. However, many still strive for the key which could unlock the mystery. Is there something like that, perhaps? A long time ago, when I was still a very young child, and was around 10, 11 years old, I have discovered that I could sit on the air. Once after a breakfast, the next morning, after the breakfast, I decided to ask my brother to take the chair underneath me. Whilst I was seated on it, he was very hesitant, at first saying, if he pulled the chair, I would fall down to the floor and hurt myself. How nice of him. But I have insisted that I was not going to fall and remain seated on the air, as if I was sitting on the chair. Of course, he did not believe me and went to Mom to ask if he should do so. And she said, go on playing whatever you are playing there. And so he came back disappointed and asked me again if he would pull the chair from underneath me, I would fall. And I said to him, repeating, that I was not going to. In fact, in that moment in time, I was not truly seated on the chair at all, but the chair was underneath me, and he could see only that as if I was seated on the chair. But he didn't know that. So, if you would pick the chair up and remove, I would most certainly remain on air, as if seated on the chair. He did not come and pull the chair. I was going to kick the chair to remain seated in the midair. Finally, he came and cautiously pulled the chair off, discovering that I was still seated on the chair. Or rather, on the air. He wondered, but how come that you are still seated in the air? I said to him that I was able to sit on air, that he could do the same thing. But he declined, probably worried that we did not carry on with that game of sitting on air from then on. was literally sitting on air as if I was seated on a cushion of very light feathers. But there were no feathers on the air, and I got up, walked a couple of steps next to the table, and sat again on air. It was very comfortable, and if I wanted to stay that way, I could sit there like that for hours. My brother could not believe it. He went to our mother asking that his brother was now sitting on air. "Mom, look how he is seated on air," he shouted. Unfortunately, Mom was a typical adult and did not believe this sort of thing, and believed that we were probably only pretending and playing a game, and did not take much note of it. Later, I have learned that I was literally doing psychokinesis. I was commanding my body to push against the air molecules, and air molecules were pushing me upwards, so there was a balance created, and I appeared to sit in the middle of air. Years and years later, I have not tried this again. Would I be able to do the same feat again? Good question. I have no idea. There was a time, again many years ago, that a certain rich Italian businessman selling worthy crystals and conducting curse removal business with many followers behind him approached me, asking that I should build him a flying carpet because of his discovery of my knowledge about the unusual sciences, although he has been explained that such was only in his imagining mind and his storyline, but not necessarily scientifically proven or provable, and that such materials were not really feasible nor available at this stage of life. He insisted that I should develop such a carpet for him, and that we could rule the world. One can see what kind of mental state we were dealing with this person. Anyway, this has been then left on the back burner for another psychiatrist to deal with for reasons I am not going to indulge myself in talking about. Now, we understand that psychokinesis is the moving of any object, including one's body, with the mind by several methods. One utilizes the technology, while the other attempts to use the unknown forces. Using of technologies for moving object is the construction and operation of almost any known devices built by men, such as automobiles, trucks, seafaring vehicles, and aeroplanes. The car moves people from one location to another. Television systems move information from one location to another. Social media has the same powers. And it is understood that we move objects using technology and equipment with certain degree of sophistication and improvement. But we do not seem to understand how we can move an object, let alone a flying carpet, with the so-called psychic forces. Do you know the words someone controlling the movements of the object, who only understands the technology and vehicles, but in psychokinesis, that someone also knows how the object is moved. That someone in psychokinesis may be called a master, controller, spirit, etc. When analyzing, we discover that there may be very little difference between moving objects, using technology, and moving objects using psychokinesis. What we also discover, which will help us move better by conventional means, may actually be leading us towards a form of psychokinesis, in which we understand how the psychic forces function and be able to use them much more effectively. Human mind has many more unexplainable mysteries. We are certainly living in the age of technological progress, and knowing the mind can move an object by willing it to move. Many people may very little interest in determining how the mind performs this. Perhaps they may want to know how an object can move by thought. But there are also many others who would never accept the possibility or psychokinesis, since they have never observed it. I, for one, search for the best scientific proofs that the mind can control matter, can be obtained in research conducted by several scientists, whom I have learned somewhat about was a physicist Helmut Schmidt. While he was working for the Boeing company as a physicist with a PhD degree, as also mentioned by the scientist A.V. Clarke, showed that certain people with psychic ability could control the flow of electrons in an electronic system. He was performing highly technically controlled scientific tests, proving that psychosis, or rather psychokinesis, is a natural phenomenon. So is psychosis. But although not fully understood, yet the tests have shown that the mysterious human mind, by some natural ability, can move the tiny electrons so that desired electronic signals can be obtained. Another case of psychokinesis was demonstrated by Julie Eisenberg, together with Ted Sirios, who had the uncanny ability to impose images on photographic film. We can call this a proof of mind control of the matter, although he moved only extremely small amount of particles, but the result was an intelligible pattern. In those tests, both of them were able to control the protons in photographic film and the TV camera tubes, as it was used in those days, to produce an image which came from his mind. But he had no idea how he accomplished his unusual feat, and the results were well documented. I myself have conducted similar tests with photographic films, and indeed additional images became visible, and the films used have never been exposed to any other images twice, but only once. With my group of people, we experimented and obtained various photographs, and the results were amazing. This will be a subject for another time that we will be talking about. In addition to these proofs of psychokinesis, there are many but less well-documented evidences of occult mysteries of the mind. A Mr. Johnson was a psychic who used ESP to communicate with Ed Mitchell on the Apollo 13 moon trip. Johnson claimed to be able to levitate himself for as much as 10 minutes, but is exhausted by the required mental effort. Arthur Ford accepted psychokinesis as a natural phenomenon. Most students of the occult and religions believe that the human mind has the ability to move objects by simply thinking about it. But very few people exercise this kind of fantastic ability. There are definite proofs that psychokinesis is possible. Many people would try to master this power, and many more cases of success will become available. Within the scientific community, researchers would accumulate the data from these cases, hopefully determining how we can use these functions so that it becomes available to everyone, producing a controlled environment for the continued existence of future generations. Ideally, things that the scientist will develop and an understanding of the natural laws which account for psychokinesis, and utilizing this knowledge to take mankind into further steps towards the goal of power and happiness. Many people consider anything originating from occult practices as being unnatural, imaginary, or sometimes supernatural. But when this science is reasonably and carefully studied and hopefully analyzed, can indicate an understanding of the natural laws, which certainly govern those strange happenings. Much data is available today. Therefore, the laws governing the psychokinesis would not conflict with already clarified issues of today in the field of occult. As it was said, two of the best comprehended are F equals ma, or force equals mass times acceleration. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. Today, the scientists understand that any object that moves must move because it is being pushed. Can we apply this to psychic phenomenon? Question mark. In here, objects are observed to move at the desire of the one with psychic powers, realizing that some force must be moving the object. Many names have been applied to this force, such as odic, eloptic, Lowell, ether, and so forth. But scientists don't use these terminologies any longer associated with no known scientific facts. However, many questions are considered under psychic force, moving them. From the scientific point of view, we know what forces available to move the objects, but not how the force is triggered or controlled. Anyway, this is only a scientific viewpoint. In order for any object to move itself, it needs to have a control of its molecules so that they push against some surrounding medium. For instance, we move our bodies by pushing our feet against the floor, the cobblestones, the street, and many molecules of the feet are pressing against the floor molecules, controlling molecules as a group in our feet. If we could control each molecule independently and move it against selected molecule in the floor or the air, causing the foot molecules to strike the air molecules with a force, we could walk in the air. This is logical. Millions of molecules in the feet would strike millions of molecules in the air and lift us as if each moving molecule were a small jet in our feet. But what can control the molecules in the feet to move individually? Intelligent beings, like humans, move their molecules by electrical signals from the brain. And some fantastic coding system originates in the brain to generate the electrical signals, to move the muscles, hence the molecules. Point that we are at the limit of scientific knowledge of how the human brain can signal the movement of molecules without electrical signals, as demonstrated by psychokinesis. As it is known that the protons can be the force to move the molecules, if we can trigger their release into the desired direction, as the photons leave the molecules move as required to strike on an air molecule as desired to lift the other molecules. And this reaction caused by photonic release is known, but very little is understood about the signal required to release a photon in a desired direction. And it is less understood about how to determine the position of molecules to understand how they should be moved. Since the unknown natural law concerns how the signal functions, research should be done and concentrated in this area. And while this is happening, there may be another approach to gain the knowledge of how to move objects. If the intelligence higher than human exists, which we believe it does, and apparently it happens, why not ask him or her how to control psychokinesis? Now, that's a good question. That is a fantastic question, in fact. The primary reason why not is that we now know more about how to communicate with higher life than what is known about and how to move objects with the mind. Based on considerable evidence, experimentation, and practice may be more important in establishing a reliable contact with higher life than knowing the natural laws and how to control the psychic forces. If the first is violated, or even just stirred, it equals mass times acceleration. When studying the students of the occult and religion and those related non-scientific areas, many people seem to feel that known natural laws are set aside for psychokinesis, miracles, faith healing, and so forth, because such an idea is based primarily on a lack of understanding of natural laws, which are the rules by which nature functions. If known natural laws were set aside, this idea would become a natural law in itself, because it would be a rule by which nature functions. But this is not being observed in nature. In fact, it seems more possible than that of occult, religious, and strange phenomena come under the rules already comprehended, and some natural laws are not yet understood. Psychokinesis reacts to the law dictating that the moving of an object requires a force. But in the occult sense, this force is nebulous. Psychic, audit, etc., as we cannot understand the force as being the result of a physical object reacting with the object being moved, in psychokinesis, the force which does the moving is as real as the man who lifts a child, says scientist A.V. Clark. But the psychic force may be much more difficult to detect than men or the child. It is unlikely that psychokinesis violates the natural law of F equals ma, and trying to detect the psychic force, we may need to assume that all natural laws will remain valid. An easy way to travel or even move furniture. To gain the great potential of teleportation, we may have a little desire to understand how psychokinesis works. But our primary desire may be to use it for a major task, such as traveling to other planets, or a minor effort like moving furniture. Psychokinesis is similar to other natural phenomena. Someone will have to understand how it functions before we can construct equipment and instruct others in how to operate the equipment. As an example, familiar to all of us, most people do not know how electricity performs its many functions. But any child can flip the switch to turn on lights, start motors, move vehicles. For a child to be able to do so, much with electricity, someone had to learn how electricity functions and construct equipment to utilize it. Similarly, to utilize psychokinesis, someone may have to understand it through research and develop equipment techniques for others to use. It is only when enough people are researching, trying new ideas, and testing that data is obtained. Moving of furniture or traveling may be easy if we understand psychokinesis or can use it. However, we may cause problems if it is used with insufficient understanding of how it works. Can the controls be stringent? There have to be rules and regulations. Nature has certainly a set of rules for us to follow. Everything we undertake. In fact, nature dictates that we use the psychokinesis following the specific rules, which may be by far the tightest, indeed the toughest controls imposed upon any of the many natural powerful forces available for humans to utilize, as we are well aware. The natural law is used in the simple moving of objects, are learned as a normal part of every youth's education in our current existence. The toddlers learn to move their hands, discovering that certain movements, such as hitting their faces, can hurt them. They learn to crawl, discovering that they must direct their crawling or running into unpleasant obstacles. They begin to ride tricycles and probably skipping, or rather skinning their hands and knees while learning that speed must be controlled. As they grow older, they learn to drive a car and must know the driving regulations to pass their drives or driver's test and avoid accidents. They can now learn to fly a plane and follow a much more stringent set of rules in handling the moving object, the airplane. There are those who have learned to control a space vehicle, as our famous scientist has already mentioned, for a trip to the moon and return to Earth. As the scientist says, these astronauts have spent years learning many stringent rules which must be obeyed if they are to move an object, even their own selves or their own vehicle, to the moon and back safely. There are so many indications that the field of psychokinesis will have even more stringent rules for its use when going to the moon. The basic principles will be the same, like, for instance, conserving energy and not harming oneself or others. These principles are already being followed by many. The primary area of research should be how to use psychokinesis. Can psychokinesis be successful? We have to do it and see. From the start of the history, mankind has used the mysterious system of psychokinesis without knowing how it worked, and for an even longer time has used oxygen without knowing what it was, until recently, well, a few years ago, discovering that it even existed. Therefore, the continued efforts had more scientific controls being applied as data is obtained, as it can become thoroughly understood and commonly used as oxygen, which was of no other use for many purposes other than breathing. Every single person on the face of Earth develops the ability to control, to a certain extent, to a certain degree, the powerful, awesome force that moves objects with the mind can tell us how to use psychokinesis more easily. By trying to use our psychic powers, many of us may receive a few rewards for that. Well, let us say that some will be highly successful. With each attempt to use this force, more data can be obtained. And if each person will send their information to other scientists working in this psychic field, as with Stobart, Ed Mitchell, Hillwood Schmidt, Jim Beal, and others, the data can be analyzed and the progress can be made in this psychic field. As it has been demonstrated with those moon trips, which you may not be hearing about much, when enough people are convinced that a task is possible and enough people work on that task, it becomes an accomplishment. Therefore, with many people, hopefully, convinced of psychokinesis, which they will be if they will try, the techniques proposing may become as common as the electricity. All those years ago, when I was demonstrating mind over matter experiences, as I said before, using photographic film, as that was the only available medium for photographic recording, and videos were not yet developed. We had films which took pictures, as we called it, in negative, and processed and printed when they became positive, beautiful images. And the colors, which were far superior when printed to today's video-based photography or digital photography. However, many things have improved and many things are so much better than they used to be. I personally had found the digital video and photography is a lot easier to manipulate, but in those days was the only thing that we could manipulate physically and psychically, and influence was the film, which camera or without the camera, and expose them to images. Even when I was overseas traveling in Egypt and in Peru, I was meditating and concentrating on images I concentrated on, imagined or looked in through a mirror, or other photographs in my album I used to carry with me. At home, people belonging to my spiritual psychic development classes, or rather personal development classes, were to take photographs on their virgin films. And on my return, I have discovered that they have indeed captured additional images in their films, which have been printed and tested, showing just one-click photography without any manipulation, with simple cameras they used to utilize. Some of my own images had been also impressed as either faint images on the ground, on grass, in the sky, with or without other additional images, in addition to what they were focusing at. But there were also those who have been exposed to images without being put in a camera. I had many critics, I can assure you, but I have no particular explanation on how it is being done. Remember, I am a scientist and cannot accept things out of the blue without a reasonable proof. But some of the things that have been captured on the film have been proof enough to me and to my group members. I'll tell you something else. How can one be convinced? That is a good question. To become convinced that psychic power is possible to utilize and try to move an object with your mind will be very difficult for some individuals, while others will be easily convinced. To be convinced that we can move an object with our minds is probably compatible to being convinced that God exists and that UFOs are proved to be real and that we have a sixth sense. We must have some strong experiences affecting our five senses to be convinced that some cloudy phenomenon can be real. Arthur Ford's book, Nothing So Strange, shows that he was so convinced of the psychic powers, including telekinesis. He speaks of how Mrs. St. Clair Stobbart, an outstanding researcher in English spiritualism, became convinced of telekinesis and began her impressive career in the psychic field. Shortly after World War I, she received a request from a Western Canadian friend asking her to arrange a sitting for our friend by proxy. Although she had no interest in the psychic field then, she went to the best place she knew about, the British College of Psychic Science or Research, and had a sitting with a tested medium. She obtained a transcript of the setting, which she sent to her Canadian friend, who wrote back verifying the information the British medium had obtained. This aroused Mrs. Stobbart, which caused her to attend a series of experiments being conducted by the College of Psychic Science with Filbert Graz of Austria. In the experiment, Mrs. Stobbart saw many demonstrations of telekinetic and other enigmatic powers of psychic Silverstein and was convinced that psychic powers were real and available. As more and more people, like Mrs. Stobbart, are convinced that psychokinesis is possible, they will obtain results which can be analyzed to improve, and techniques and accumulation of data can be considered. If we can be convinced that psychic manipulation is possible, it will become a reality, and another of mankind's dreams will come true, says scientist V. Clark. And how right he is. Dr. Amado of Japan has successfully demonstrated what the thought can do to the water molecules. And knowing that human bodies are made of more water molecules, one tends to ask the question, what can our thoughts do to the human body? I shall leave the answers to you. Just think about it. We will talk more when meeting by the next episode. Until then, keep smiling and be happy. Thank you.